A struggling rancher bought a 12-year-old black girl from child labor, and what happened next changed everything. $50 for the girl, the weathered mountain man shouted, outbidding miners who wanted her for dangerous shaft work. The town saw him as a broken fool, couldn't feed his dying cattle, now taking on another mouth. Everyone expected the failed rancher to lose his land within weeks, disappearing like so many others before him. But the trembling girl carried secrets sewn into her ragged dress, knowledge that could either save them both or destroy everything they'd fought to build. Her silence wasn't from fear alone. She possessed information that powerful men had killed for, information that made her the most dangerous person in the territory. Would the rancher's desperate gamble lead to their salvation? Or had he unknowingly signed both their death warrants? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The sun barely crested the Colorado mountains when Silas Graves counted his cattle for the third time that week. 12 head left. The bank notice crumpled in his weathered hands demanded $800 in 30 days, or forfeit the ranch. His neighbors whispered behind cupped hands when he rode past their prosperous spreads. The schoolteacher turned rancher who couldn't make either profession work. His wife's grave marker stood as the only witness to his daily failures. The general store buzzed with morning gossip when Silas hitched his horse outside. Through the window, he watched shopkeepers shake their heads and point in his direction. Their message was clear. Another broken man heading for the inevitable. Silas needed supplies, but his coin purse held barely enough for coffee and hardtack. The storekeeper's cold stare followed him through every aisle. No credit extended to dying operations. Outside Murphy's saloon, a crowd gathered around Bart Townsend's makeshift auction platform. Townsend owed money to half the territory and collected debts for the other half. Today he was settling accounts the hard way. A small figure stood on the wooden crate. The girl couldn't have been more than 12, her dark skin contrasting sharply with her tattered gray dress. She kept her eyes fixed on the ground while men shouted bids around her. "Strong arms for the copper mines," called a bearded prospector. $30. "40 for kitchen work," countered the hotel owner. Silas had seen this before. Children sold to pay gambling debts or family obligations. The law looked the other way when money changed hands and proper papers were signed. Most lasted 6 months in the mines before accidents claimed them. The girl lifted her head briefly. Something in her eyes caught Silas off guard. Not the broken stare he expected, but a sharp intelligence quickly hidden again. She was studying the crowd, memorizing faces, calculating odds of survival with each potential buyer. 45 for mine work, the prospector repeated. She'll fit in the tight shafts where grown men can't reach. The hotel owner waved dismissively. The girl would disappear into the dangerous copper mines within days. Silas watched her small hands tremble as the bidding continued. She understood exactly what each offer meant. His last $50. Rent money. Food money. The difference between another week of trying and immediate surrender. $50, Silas heard himself say. The crowd turned. Laughter rippled through the gathering. The failed rancher who couldn't afford feed for his dying cattle now wanted to buy a person. "You sure about that, Graves?" Townsend's voice carried amusement. "This ain't charity work." $50, Silas repeated louder. The prospector studied Silas with contempt. "Fool's got more money than sense. Let him waste it." Townsend accepted the crumpled bills. Papers were signed with witnesses present, legal and binding according to territorial law. The girl belonged to Silas Graves now, whatever that meant. She followed him to his wagon without speaking. Her bare feet moved carefully across the rocky ground, avoiding sharp stones with practiced precision. Everything about her movements suggested someone accustomed to hardship, but not broken by it. The ride to his ranch passed in silence. Silas stole glances at his unexpected passenger. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, but her eyes constantly moved. She was reading the landscape, noting landmarks, measuring distances, survival instincts running deeper than fear. At the ranch, Silas pointed toward the small cabin attached to the main house. "You can sleep there. There's a well behind the barn for washing." She nodded once and disappeared inside. No questions about work expectations or daily routines. She understood the transaction, but seemed to be evaluating something beyond immediate survival. That evening, Silas found her sitting on the porch steps, staring at the horizon. He brought her a plate of beans and hardtack, the same meal he ate every night. "Can you read?" he asked, curious about the intelligence he'd glimpsed. She looked up sharply, then nodded slowly. Silas handed her the bank foreclosure notice. "What does this say?" Her eyes moved across the document quickly, too quickly for someone just learning letters. 30 days to pay $800 or lose the property. She paused. "You spent your last money on me?" Her voice was soft but clear. Educated. This girl had learned proper speech somewhere, from someone who valued learning over labor. "Why did you bid on me?" she continued. Silas considered the question. Guilt over watching a child sold for mine work. Desperate loneliness driving foolish choices, or something else he couldn't name yet. Seemed like the right thing to do. She studied his face with unsettling directness. "My papa used to say this land holds secrets. He said men who knew how to look could find treasures others missed." The statement hung in the evening air. Silas wanted to ask what her father had meant, but the girl had already retreated into silence. She finished her meal and returned to the cabin without another word. Later, through his window, Silas watched her carefully examining something small in her hands. She held it close to the lamplight, studying it with the same intensity she'd shown while reading the legal document. Whatever secrets she carried, they ran deeper than a 12-year-old's simple survival. 3 days passed before Silas discovered the girl crying behind the barn. She sat hunched over torn fabric, desperately trying to mend something hidden in her dress lining. Her careful composure had finally cracked. "What's wrong?" Silas approached slowly, the way he would a wounded animal. She looked up with tears streaming down her cheeks. In her hands lay pieces of yellowed paper covered in detailed drawings and measurements, maps, survey charts, technical drawings that belonged in a geologist's office, not sewn into a child's clothing. "They're ruined," she whispered. "Papa made me promise to keep them safe." Silas knelt beside her and studied the papers. Lines marked elevation changes across familiar terrain. Numbers indicated mineral compositions. Symbols showed geological formations. His own ranch appeared in the corner of one map, marked with specific notations he couldn't understand. "What are these?" "Papa's surveys." She wiped her nose on her sleeve. "Mama said they were the most important thing we owned. More valuable than money or property." The girl gathered the papers carefully. "My real name is Alara Blackwood. My parents were Henry and Amelia Blackwood. They traveled through territories making maps for the government and mining companies." Silas recognized the name. 2 years ago, newspapers reported the murder of geological surveyors by bandits near Cotton Bend. Their daughter had been presumed dead. "Everyone thinks you died with them. Papa saw the men coming. He told me to run and hide the maps. I watched from the rocks while they killed Mama and Papa." Her voice remained steady despite the tears. "The men weren't bandits. They wore badges and talked about judges and land rights." She pointed to markings on the survey covering Silas's property. "Papa found silver deposits here. Lots of them. He was excited because the formations suggested a major vein running through multiple properties." Silas stared at the technical drawings. "Silver? On my land?" "Papa taught me to read geological signs. These symbols show high-grade ore deposits." Ilara traced lines across the map. "Your ranch sits on top of what Papa called a mother lode." The revelation hit Silas like a physical blow. His worthless, foreclosure-bound property contained valuable silver deposits. The girl he'd impulsively bought carried proof of mineral wealth beyond his imagination. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Trust has to be earned. Papa said these maps got people killed. I needed to know if you were safe." That evening, Alara led Silas to a rocky outcrop behind his grazing pasture. She knelt and pointed to discolored stone formations barely visible in the fading light. "Papa taught me this. She picked up a small rock and scratched it against another stone. Silver streaks appeared in the scratch marks. See how it shines? That means ore close to the surface. Silas had walked past these rocks hundreds of times without noticing anything special. To him, they looked like ordinary stone. To Alara, they were signposts pointing toward hidden treasure. My parents spent 3 years mapping this whole territory. They found silver, copper, and gold deposits that nobody else knew existed. She stood and brushed dirt from her dress. Papa said someday these maps would help honest families instead of greedy men who steal land. They returned to the cabin as stars appeared overhead. Alara spread the survey maps across Silas's kitchen table, explaining her father's notations and measurement systems. Her knowledge ran deep. This wasn't a child repeating memorized information, but someone who genuinely understood geological science. Papa started teaching me when I was 7. He said knowledge was the only inheritance that couldn't be stolen. She pointed to elevation markings. Mama taught me mathematics and how to calculate mineral densities from ore samples. Silas realized he was looking at a 12-year-old expert in geological surveying. Her parents had created a living library of valuable information disguised as an orphaned child. We should test your father's findings. That night they gathered tools and returned to the outcrop. Alara directed Silas where to dig, reading terrain features invisible to his untrained eyes. Within 2 hours they uncovered a vein of silver ore running through solid rock. Papa's maps are always accurate. Alara held a chunk of raw silver up to their lantern. He never guessed about mineral deposits. He only marked what he could prove. They worked in careful silence, extracting enough silver to fill a small canvas bag, raw ore that could be refined and sold discreetly in nearby towns, enough to make ranch payments and buy time to develop a proper mining operation. This has to stay secret until we can establish legal ownership, Silas warned. I've kept secrets for 2 years. I can keep them longer. Over the following days, they developed a routine. Ranch work during daylight hours when neighbors might observe. Mining after dark when they could work undetected. Alara's geological knowledge guided every decision about where to dig and how to extract ore safely. She taught Silas to identify different grades of silver ore and recognize dangerous rock formations that might collapse. Her father's expertise lived on through careful lessons passed down to his daughter. Papa said mining was like solving puzzles. You follow clues in the rock until you find the treasure. Alara demonstrated proper ore extraction techniques. But you have to respect the earth, or it will hurt you. Within a week, they had extracted enough silver to pay off Silas's immediate debts. Hidden wealth lay beneath property everyone considered worthless. The failed rancher and the auction-bought girl had become secret partners in the most valuable mining operation in the territory. But their success wouldn't remain hidden much longer. The silver paid Silas's overdue bills within 2 weeks. Store owners who had refused him credit suddenly welcomed his business. Neighbors who had avoided him now offered friendly waves from their property lines. Money changed everything, but it also raised questions. "Where'd you find the cash, Graves?" asked the bank manager while counting Silas's loan payment. "Thought you were down to your last dollar." "Sold some cattle to a buyer in Denver," Silas lied smoothly. "Got a fair price for good stock." The explanation satisfied most people, but Silas noticed Sheriff Mullins watching him more closely during trips to town. The lawman had connections throughout the territory and probably knew exactly how many cattle Silas owned. At night, Alara continued teaching Silas advanced mining techniques her father had developed. She showed him how to build proper timber supports to prevent cave-ins and how to follow silver veins through different rock formations. Papa learned this from miners in California during the gold rush. She demonstrated how to test rock stability before digging deeper tunnels. He said most mining accidents happened because people got greedy and ignored safety. Their operation expanded carefully. Alara's geological surveys revealed multiple silver veins crossing the property in different directions. With proper development, the mine could produce wealth for decades. "We need legal mining claims filed with the territorial government," Alara explained while studying her father's maps. Otherwise, someone else could challenge our rights to the silver. Silas planned a trip to the territorial capital to file the necessary paperwork. Everything had to appear legitimate before word of their discovery spread beyond the ranch. But their secret was already attracting attention. A stranger appeared in town asking questions about properties in the area. The woman looked weathered from hard travel, with scars across her hands and a cautious way of watching crowds. She inquired about recent land sales and whether anyone had seen a young girl matching a specific description. "She's got a crescent-shaped birthmark behind her left ear," the woman told the hotel clerk. "About 12 years old. Travels with valuable papers." The clerk shook his head, but word spread quickly through the small community. Someone was looking for a girl who sounded exactly like Alara. When Silas returned from town with supplies, he found Alara hiding in the barn loft. She had seen the stranger from a distance and recognized something that terrified her. "That woman was asking about me." Alara's voice shook with emotion she rarely showed. "She knew about my birthmark. Only family would know that detail." "Could it be your mother?" Silas asked gently. "Mama's dead. I watched her die." But doubt crept into Alara's voice. "Unless she survived somehow. Unless the men who killed Papa didn't finish the job." The possibility of surviving family members complicated everything. If Alara's mother lived, she might have legal claims on the geological surveys and any mineral rights derived from them. She might also attract the same dangerous attention that had gotten her husband killed. That evening brought worse news. Bart Townsend arrived at the ranch with Sheriff Mullins and 2 armed deputies. They rode up to the house with official expressions and legal documents. "Got a problem, Graves," Sheriff Mullins announced without dismounting. "Seems the sale of your girl might not be legal after all." Townsend looked uncomfortable but determined. "Judge Harrison reviewed the paperwork. Says I didn't have proper authority to conduct that auction. The girl needs to be returned for proper placement." Silas felt steel enter his spine. 2 weeks of success had rebuilt his confidence. The silver mine gave him resources and options he'd never possessed before. "I paid good money for legal papers. Sale was witnessed by half the town." "Judge says otherwise," Mullins replied. "You got 7 days to produce the girl for proper authorities. Don't make this harder than necessary." After they left, Silas found Alara listening from inside the house. She had heard every word and understood the implications perfectly. "They're not really concerned about legal paperwork," she said. "Someone told them I'm here. Someone who knows what I carry." The timing seemed too convenient. A mysterious woman asking about Alara, followed immediately by legal challenges to their arrangement. Forces were moving against them with coordination that suggested larger planning. "Judge Harrison ordered this," Alara continued. "Papa's maps mentioned that name. Harrison was buying up properties in areas where Papa found mineral deposits." The pieces connected with terrible clarity. Judge Harrison had been using insider knowledge of geological surveys to acquire valuable land before owners knew what they possessed. Henry Blackwood's murder hadn't been random banditry, but calculated elimination of someone who threatened a profitable conspiracy. "Harrison knows I survived. He knows I have the original maps that prove his land acquisitions are based on stolen information." Over the next few days, they prepared for the confrontation. Silas used silver profits to hire a lawyer in the territorial capital and file preliminary mining claims on his property. Legal ownership of mineral rights would be harder to challenge than custody of a child. Alara made copies of her father's most important surveys and hid them in different locations around the ranch. If the original maps were seized, backup information would survive to expose Harrison's crimes. The mysterious woman continued asking questions in town, but stayed carefully out of sight when deputies were present. She was avoiding official attention while searching for something specific. On the 6th day, Silas spotted her watching the ranch from distant hills. Through his telescope, he could see weathered features and determined eyes that reminded him strongly of Alara's facial structure. "I think your mother is alive," he told Alara that evening. "And I think she's trying to find you without alerting the same people who killed your father." The 7-day deadline approached with multiple forces converging on their small ranch. Legal authorities demanding Alara's return, a possible family member seeking reunion, dangerous conspirators protecting murderous secrets. Everything would come to a head within hours. On the seventh morning, the mysterious woman appeared at Silas's front door. Up close, her resemblance to Alara was unmistakable. Same intelligent eyes, same determined jawline, same way of holding her head when thinking carefully. "I'm looking for my daughter," she said simply. "Alara Blackwood. I believe you purchased her from Bart Townsend." Alara emerged from the house behind Silas. Mother and daughter stared at each other across 2 years of believing the other was dead. Neither moved for a long moment, as if afraid the vision might disappear. Then Alara ran into her mother's arms, and both women collapsed to their knees in the dirt, sobbing and holding each other with desperate intensity. "I searched every town, every mining camp, every place they might have taken you," Amelia Blackwood whispered through her tears. "I never stopped looking. I saw you die," Alara said between sobs. "I saw the blood. I saw you fall. I survived. Barely. Took me months to heal enough to travel." Amelia pulled back to study her daughter's face. "You're so much older, so much stronger than when I lost you." Silas watched the reunion with mixed emotions. Joy at seeing Alara reunited with family, but also fear of losing the daughter he'd grown to love. The girl who had saved his ranch and given his life purpose might disappear as suddenly as she had arrived. Amelia noticed his expression and stood to face him directly. "Thank you for protecting her, for giving her safety when I couldn't." "She saved me more than I saved her," Silas replied honestly. "Papa's maps," Alara said urgently. "I kept them safe like you taught me. They're all here." Amelia's face hardened at the mention of the surveys. "Those maps got your father killed. They're still getting people killed." She explained how she had spent 2 years tracking the men responsible for Henry's murder. The investigation led her through a network of corruption involving local judges, sheriffs, and businessmen who were systematically stealing valuable properties. Judge Harrison has been using Henry's stolen surveys to buy land before owners know what they possess. He's acquired dozens of properties this way, always through legal channels that can't be challenged later. The conspiracy reached further than any of them had imagined. Families throughout the territory had lost their homes and livelihoods to Harrison's scheme. Some had been murdered when they asked too many questions or refused to sell. Harrison knows Alara survived. He's been searching for her ever since he realized some of Henry's surveys were missing. Amelia's voice carried 2 years of accumulated anger. He needs those maps to complete his land grab operation. That's why Sheriff Mullins is demanding her return, Silas realized. Harrison ordered it. The legal challenge is just the beginning. If that doesn't work, Harrison will use more direct methods. Amelia's scars told the story of someone who had already survived those methods once. They spent the morning comparing information. Amelia had documented dozens of suspicious land acquisitions, mysterious deaths, and families driven from their property under questionable circumstances. Alara's maps provided the missing piece that proved systematic fraud. "We have enough evidence to expose the entire operation," Amelia concluded. "But we need to get it to territorial authorities before Harrison realizes what we know." That afternoon brought Sheriff Mullins with a larger group of men. 6 armed deputies surrounded the house while Mullins approached with official papers. "Time's up, Graves. Hand over the girl for proper placement." "She's with her mother now," Silas replied. "Amelia Blackwood is alive and has legal custody of her own daughter." Mullins studied Amelia with suspicion. "Got any proof of that? Death certificates said the whole family was killed by bandits." "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated." Amelia produced documents from her coat. Marriage certificate, birth records, and witness statements from people who knew our family. The paperwork looked legitimate, but Mullins wasn't backing down easily. "Judge Harrison needs to review these documents personally. The girl comes with us until proper custody is determined." "She stays here," Silas said firmly. "You don't have a choice in this matter." Mullins gestured to his deputies, who began moving closer to the house. Alara stepped forward with her father's geological maps in her hands. "Tell Judge Harrison I have something he wants. Something he killed my father to get." The map stopped everyone cold. Mullins recognized their significance immediately. These were the legendary Blackwood surveys that Harrison had been seeking for 2 years. The judge will want to examine those personally, Mullins said carefully. Then he can come here and negotiate like an honest man, Amelia replied. We're not going anywhere with you. The standoff stretched through the afternoon. Deputies surrounded the property but made no move to force entry. Mullins rode back to town to consult with higher authorities. As evening approached, smoke appeared on the horizon from the direction of Amelia's temporary camp. Harrison's men had found and burned her hideout, destroying whatever evidence she had stored there. They're escalating, Amelia observed grimly. Harrison knows we have what he needs, but he also knows we can destroy him with it. The three of them prepared for a siege. Alara's maps were copied and hidden in multiple locations around the ranch. If Harrison wanted the surveys, he would have to negotiate rather than simply take them by force. But everyone knew the judge wouldn't negotiate fairly. Too much money and too many murders protected his empire for him to simply surrender. The final confrontation was coming, and only one side could survive it. Judge Harrison arrived at dawn with a full legal entourage. 6 armed men, Sheriff Mullins, a court clerk, and official papers bearing territorial seals. The judge himself was a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and expensive clothes that projected authority. Mr. Graves, I understand you're harboring stolen property belonging to the territorial government, Harrison announced from horseback. Geological surveys are official documents that cannot be privately owned. Silas, Amelia, and Alara stood together on the porch, presenting a united front. The morning sun cast long shadows that made the confrontation feel like a scene from an old Western drama. These surveys belong to my family, Amelia replied firmly. My husband created them through his own research and expertise. Harrison smiled coldly. Henry Blackwood was a territorial employee. All work conducted under government contract becomes government property upon completion. He produced an official-looking document with elaborate seals and signatures. The paper declared eminent domain over Silas's ranch for railroad development and designated all geological surveys as territorial assets. Alara studied the eminent domain papers with sharp attention. Her father had taught her to read legal documents carefully, looking for inconsistencies and forged elements. Something about the signature caught her eye immediately. This signature is wrong, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Harrison's confident expression flickered. What did you say, child? The signature on this document. It's supposed to be from Territorial Governor Matthews, but it's written in my father's handwriting. Alara's voice carried absolute certainty. I know Papa's writing better than anyone. She pointed to specific letter formations in the forged signature. Papa always made his capital M with 3 peaks instead of 2. Governor Matthews uses a different style completely. The accusation hung in the morning air like smoke from a gunshot. Everyone present understood the implications. If the signature was forged, the entire legal proceeding was fraudulent. You're using my father's identity to legitimize fake documents, Alara continued with growing confidence. How many other papers have you signed with his name? Harrison's face darkened with anger, but before he could respond, new riders appeared on the horizon. A small group approached under territorial flags, led by a man wearing a United States Marshal's badge. Marshal Thompson had been investigating missing persons reports throughout the region. Amelia's inquiries about her murdered family had eventually reached federal attention, especially when the pattern suggested systematic elimination of territorial employees. Judge Harrison, I have federal warrants for your arrest, Marshal Thompson announced as he dismounted. Charges include murder, fraud, conspiracy, and theft of government property. The marshal's arrival changed everything. Harrison's armed men suddenly looked uncertain about their loyalty. Federal authority trumped local jurisdiction, and everyone knew it. These charges are preposterous, Harrison protested. Based on testimony from known criminals and fugitives. Based on evidence from multiple sources, Thompson corrected, including witness testimony, forged documents, and geological surveys that prove systematic fraud. Bart Townsend emerged from behind the marshal's group. His presence shocked everyone, especially Harrison, who had relied on the debt collector's silence about illegal activities. "I've been working with federal investigators for 3 months," Townsend explained, "documenting Harrison's operation from the inside. Every illegal land seizure, every forged document, every family threatened or killed." The betrayal hit Harrison like a physical blow. His most trusted associate had been gathering evidence against him while pretending loyalty. Years of carefully planned crimes were about to be exposed in detail. Other townspeople began arriving as word spread about the confrontation. Families who had lost property under suspicious circumstances, business owners who had been forced to sell under threat, people who had accepted Harrison's authority without questioning his methods. "The Hendricks family didn't die in a house fire," Townsend testified publicly. "Harrison's men set that fire when they refused to sell their copper-rich land. The Martinez family wasn't killed by bandits. They were murdered for asking too many questions about mineral rights." Each revelation brought gasps from the growing crowd. People realized they had been living under a regime of systematic terror disguised as legitimate government. Ilara stepped forward with her father's complete geological surveys. "These maps show every mineral deposit Papa discovered in this region. Judge Harrison has been using stolen copies to buy valuable properties before owners knew what they possessed." She pointed to specific markings on the surveys. "Every property Harrison acquired in the past 2 years appears on these maps as containing valuable minerals. The odds of that happening by coincidence are impossible." Marshall Thompson examined the surveys and compared them to Harrison's land acquisition records. The correlation was perfect and damning. Harrison had been systematically stealing properties based on Henry Blackwood's murdered expertise. "Henry Blackwood was killed because he discovered your operation," Thompson concluded. "You needed his surveys but couldn't risk him exposing your crimes. Harrison made one final desperate attempt to maintain control. These people are criminals and liars. Their testimony cannot be trusted." "But the physical evidence can be," Thompson replied. He produced additional documents seized from Harrison's office. "We found copies of forged signatures, maps stolen from the Blackwood murder scene, and correspondence detailing planned acquisitions of properties you hadn't even visited yet." The case was airtight. Years of careful investigation had documented every aspect of Harrison's criminal empire. The geological surveys provided the final piece that proved systematic fraud, rather than isolated incidents. Harrison's armed men began surrendering their weapons as federal deputies moved in to make arrests. The conspiracy that had terrorized the territory for years was finally collapsing under the weight of accumulated evidence. Justice was coming at last. Judge Harrison's arrest sent shockwaves through the territorial government. Federal investigators uncovered a corruption network spanning 3 counties and involving dozens of officials. Property seizures based on forged documents were declared null and void. Families who had lost their homes received legal orders restoring their rightful ownership. The territorial capital appointed an emergency commission to review all land transactions approved during Harrison's tenure. Ilara's geological surveys became official evidence in the largest fraud case in Colorado history. Her father's work, stolen through murder, finally served its intended purpose of helping honest families. Within 2 months, every fraudulent land seizure was reversed. The Hendricks family's surviving relatives reclaimed their copper-rich property. The Martinez family's cousins recovered their stolen ranch. Dozens of other families received justice they had never expected to see. Silas found himself at the center of a legal transformation. His ranch, now confirmed to contain valuable silver deposits, became the foundation for a legitimate mining operation. Federal authorities granted him exclusive mineral rights in recognition of his role in exposing Harrison's crimes. But the most important change was smaller and more personal. Amelia Blackwood filed legal adoption papers naming Silas as Ilara's adoptive father. The documents created a family bound by choice rather than blood, united by shared hardship and mutual respect. "Henry would have wanted this," Amelia explained while signing the papers. "He always said family meant the people who stood by you when everything else failed." The adoption made official what had already become true through daily life. Silas had found a daughter in the girl he'd impulsively purchased at auction. Ilara had found a father in the man who'd protected her when no one else would. 3 months after Harrison's arrest, the silver mine was producing steady income under proper legal oversight. Silas hired experienced miners and followed all territorial safety regulations. The operation employed 12 men from town and provided steady wages during difficult economic times. Ilara divided her time between helping manage the mining operation and attending the school Amelia established, using funds from the mine's profits. The girl who had been sold for $50 now owned partial interest in the most profitable silver mine in the region. Papa always said education was the most valuable inheritance, Ilara explained, while reviewing mining reports with adult-level comprehension. But he also said knowledge without application was just fancy daydreaming. She applied her geological expertise to expand the mining operation safely and efficiently. Her father's surveys revealed additional mineral deposits on neighboring properties, leading to partnerships with other families recovering their stolen land. The community that had once whispered about Silas's failures now sought his advice on business matters. The failed rancher had become a successful mining entrepreneur and respected community leader. But success brought new responsibilities. Bart Townsend approached Silas 6 months after the trials ended. The former debt collector looked healthier and more confident than he had in years. "Got something to ask you," Townsend said. "I'm thinking about starting a freight business to serve all these new mining operations. Could use a partner with capital and local connections." Silas studied the proposal Townsend presented. Detailed business plans, route maps, and financial projections showed serious preparation. The man who had once sold children to pay gambling debts was genuinely trying to build an honest future. "Why come to me?" Silas asked. "Because you gave people second chances when nobody else would. Because you proved a man can change his whole life if he's willing to work for it." The freight partnership became another success story. Townsend's knowledge of territorial roads and Silas's mining connections created a profitable transportation network serving the entire region. 1 year after the auction behind Murphy's Saloon, the same town square hosted a different kind of gathering. Families whose properties had been restored celebrated with a harvest festival. Children played games while adults shared food and music under autumn stars. Silas watched Ilara demonstrate geological principles to a group of fascinated younger children. She had grown taller and more confident, but retained the sharp intelligence that had first caught his attention. "She's going to be a remarkable woman," Amelia observed, joining Silas near the bandstand. "She already is." Amelia had established herself as the territorial school teacher, using her own education and Henry's scientific books to provide advanced learning opportunities. The school served children from families across the region, creating the next generation of educated citizens. "Henry's dream was that his work would help families build better lives," she continued. "I think he'd be proud of what we've accomplished." The festival continued late into the evening. Former enemies danced together. Children whose families had been restored played alongside those who had never lost their homes. The community had healed through shared truth rather than continued deception. As the evening wound down, Silas found himself standing with his adopted family on the same spot where he'd made the desperate decision to spend his last $50 on a trembling girl at auction. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if someone else had bought me that day?" Ilara asked. Silas considered the question seriously. "I think you would have found a way to survive and succeed eventually. You're too smart and too determined to be held down permanently." "But we wouldn't have found each other," she replied. "We wouldn't have become a family." That was the real treasure they had discovered, not silver deposits or mineral rights or business success, but the bonds forged through choosing to trust each other when trust seemed impossible. The struggling rancher and the auction-bought girl had changed everything, just as the title promised. They had exposed corruption, restored justice, and proved that family could be created through love and shared purpose. Their story would be told for generations throughout the territory, inspiring other families to stand together against injustice and build communities based on truth rather than fear.